Zeus is the almighty ruler of the world. He has vanquished all, even the most fearsome of his opponents. He has avenged his mother and won all of the wars. He reigns supreme over both the mortals and the gods of the pantheon. There are 12 of them in his grand council, 12 gods and goddesses, the great Olympians. But after battling his way to the top, Zeus found himself presiding over a universe that had been turned upside down and torn apart. He thus had to remodel the world, as it were, to establish a more harmonious, a more measured form of governance. But can power be exercised without that passion that consumes the heart as well as the body? The truth of the matter is that Zeus liked to seduce. It was in fact through his many wives and mistresses that he would strengthen his own power. Zeus would acquire the assets of each of his conquests. Those who were to know him as rain, as a bull, or as a swan, would give birth to a race of demigods and heroes whose names would become the names of almost every region in the world. Zeus's amorous adventures were thus more than just romances. It was through his love interests that the master of Olympus indirectly imposed his authority, an authority that was based on the institution of laws and norms that had to be obeyed. Any transgression was severely punished. So in a certain way, Zeus combined love with order. First, there was Metis. Metis was a beautiful sea nymph. She represented prudence and wisdom, as well as cunning. In the primordial time when the world was in gestation, her precious advice had enabled Zeus to avenge his mother and to rescue his brothers and sisters. So did the master of Olympus then propose to her out of gratitude? Gratefulness is not a strong point among those in power. No, Zeus was attracted to Metis. He was even very attracted to her. And as for Metis, how could she refuse? It was the king of the gods who was asking for her hand. The young nymph was flattered. She felt very honored. She said yes, and so they were wed. Their post-nuptial bliss knew no bounds until one day an oracle revealed to Zeus that after giving him a daughter, his wife would bear him a son, and that the boy would later dethrone him, as he himself had dethroned his own father, Cronus. We can imagine how disturbed the divine ruler felt. And so, in order to keep such a scenario from happening again, when Metis told him she was pregnant, Zeus challenged her to what was, to say the very least, a rather unusual contest. He dared her to outdo him by turning herself into different creatures. This game of metamorphosis is commonly played among the gods who have the power to change themselves into whatever they choose. Metis, though she was the symbol of prudence, threw caution to the winds. She blithely went through a series of metamorphoses, turning herself into a lioness, and then a wild boar, a flame, and even a fly. Zeus congratulated her. Very good, but can you make yourself into something even smaller? Metis was caught up in the game and changed herself once again, this time into a drop of water. Zeus applauded, and then immediately swallowed it. But one does not swallow the goddess of cunning without getting into big trouble. After a while, Zeus was seized by a raging headache that was so violent that he felt like his head was about to explode. His son Hephaestus, the god of blacksmiths, ran up in a panic and with his great mallet struck his father's head, splitting it open. And a miracle happened. The daughter that Metis had been carrying leapt out of the head of the king of the gods. Her name was Athena. Athena, the goddess of war, protector of the city. She emerged in all of her splendor with her helmet and her spear, ready for battle. Rhea, Zeus's mother, became aware of her son's lustful tendencies. She sensed that his romantic and sexual volatility would lead to disastrous consequences. So she forbade him to remarry. She forbade him? How dare she? Had she forgotten that she was speaking to the master of the universe? Zeus took offense and threatened to rape his progenitress then and there. Rhea was unimpressed. She changed herself into a serpent, ready to pounce on her son. Zeus did the same thing. He turned himself into a male serpent and, entwining his mother in an indissoluble knot, carried out his threat. With his mother out of the way, Zeus did not waste any time in choosing a new wife. And he did not choose just anyone. Through Metis, Zeus had acquired cunning and prudence. What he lacked was a sense of equity, a sense of justice. He therefore set his heart on the venerable Themis, a Titanide. Themis was the goddess of justice. She and Zeus would have 15 children together. To begin with, there were 3 lovely daughters, the Hours, 3 maidens who would oversee the regularity of the seasons. After that, they had 3 more girls, 3 more daughters who lived somewhere in an impenetrable cavern near Olympus. Three beautiful women with vacant eyes. They went everywhere together, connected by a thread, and they took on the appearance of simple spinners. At the mention of their names, mortals as well as gods trembled. Clotho, who spun the thread. Lachesis, who determined the length of the thread. And Atropos, the merciless Atropos, who cut the thread. That thread is, of course, the thread of life. It measured out the lives of mortals as well as the lives of the gods. The 3 maidens were called the Morai by the Greeks, and later on the Parcae by the Romans. Their decrees were absolute. Nobody had the power to change anything at all. Zeus himself acknowledged their superiority and never dared to challenge them. The Moirai were the 3 fates. It wasn't long, however, before Zeus repudiated Themis, although he kept her by his side as a sort of counselor. So far, his love affairs had given him prudence, cunning, and justice. But what is a king without a queen? It was time to choose a queen. She would come from his own family, and since incest was quite common in the world of the gods, Zeus's 3rd wife would be none other than his sister, the goddess Hera, who was violent and irascible, and very jealous. Brother and sister would be wed in secret on the island of Samos. In fact, with Hera, Zeus got caught at his own game. For Hera at first spurned his advances. Zeus tried to seduce her in vain. After several failed attempts, he appeared to her in the guise of a young bird that had fallen from its nest and was shivering with cold. Moved by the sight, Hera picked it up and held it against her in order to warm it up. At that point, Zeus changed back into himself and tried to ravish her. Not one to get flustered, Hera decided that she would give in to him, but only if he promised to marry her. Zeus, unable to contain his desire, agreed, and the beautiful goddess would lose no time in reminding him of his vow. Hera, it must be said, had many assets. Her beauty may have been a bit severe, but she took pride in her appearance and was known as the goddess of the white arms. She was irresistible. His marriage to Hera, which in a way had been forced upon him, and the beauty of his wife, did not stop Zeus from pursuing his amorous affairs, which he did with a very precise aim in mind. As the master of the universe, he was seeking to strengthen his connection with the different elements in nature. For example, with water and the seas. Where had he met Eurynome, the oldest daughter of Oceanus? Oh, well, it doesn't matter. Like the others, she succumbed to his charms. She would give him 3 children, the famous Graces, the 3 Graces who personify the joy of life, deemed to be a gift from the gods. Later, Zeus would spend not less than 9 nights with another Titanide, the beautiful Mnemosyne, or Memory, who would give him 9 daughters, the Muses. The Muses represented the arts, and each muse had her own special gift: eloquence, history, poetry, music, etc. The Muses divided their time between Mount Olympus, where they entertained the gods with their talents, and Mount Helicon, where, it was said, there was a spring that was a source of poetic inspiration. Among the gods, there was one goddess whose beauty was unsurpassable as well as mysterious. She was the goddess of the night, Leto. Zeus desired her. He had desired her for a long time, and he wanted a boy, a beautiful boy, who would be the god of the light of the sun, the god of music and of poetry. He would get this child from the goddess of the night. Had he forgotten Hera, his wife, who was as vengeful as she was jealous? Leto was a mistress that Zeus regularly honored with his favors. She soon became pregnant with twins. But the Queen of Olympus, exasperated by her husband's latest escapade, sent Python, a monstrous serpent who rose out of the depths of the earth, to pursue poor Leto. Hera also decreed that Leto should never find rest in any land on which the sun shone. The unfortunate goddess was forced to wander endlessly all over Greece until she finally came, when she was already in the throes of labor, to a small island in the Aegean Sea that agreed to give her asylum. She gave birth to a girl, Artemis, and to a boy, Apollo. But Zeus's wandering eye did not only fall upon goddesses. Women, mortal women, also stirred the heart of the god of the gods. And that posed more than one problem. First of all, because It is not in the order of things for gods and mortals to mix. And secondly, because a mere mortal cannot look upon the divine glory of a god. But Zeus had fallen passionately in love with one woman on earth, one woman in particular. She was the daughter of the king of Thebes. Her name was Semele. In order to woo her, Zeus had no choice but to appear to her in the guise of a handsome prince. This was the only way that a god could be viewed by the human eye. The problem was that our divine philanderer was still married to Hera, and she furiously disapproved of this new romance that was developing between her husband and Semele. Hera had no intention whatsoever of turning a blind eye. She took on the appearance of Semele's old nurse, an elderly woman whom Semele loved and trusted, and went to see her. Semele, who was already pregnant, was about to give birth. "This man who claims to be Zeus," the old nurse said to her, "are you sure he's not an impostor? Then tell him to show you who he really is. If your lover is indeed Zeus, ask him to prove it to you. Let him reveal himself to you in all of his splendor, just as he appears to the other gods." These words did not fail to strike a chord with Semele. She began to doubt. This man, her lover, could it really be Zeus? The next time he came to see her, she begged him to show himself to her, as he really was. Zeus refused. He knew only too well what the consequences would be. Semele insisted. Zeus stood his ground. "If that's the way it is," Semele threatened him, "you will no longer be allowed in my bed." Mad with desire for Semele, Zeus capitulated. As his lover looked on in awe and astonishment, he revealed himself to her as he really was. In the eyes of mortals, he was thunder and lightning. The entire palace went up in a blaze, and along with it poor Semele. She had just enough time to give birth to her child before she was consumed by the flames. Miraculously, the fire spared her child. It was a boy. Zeus took the infant with him. He would be called Dionysus. Clearly, Zeus could not sleep with mortals without employing incredible stratagems. At times he became an eagle, at other times a goose, or even a shower of gold, varying his many amorous metamorphoses just for the pleasure of it. On seeing an exquisite young woman playing on the beach, Zeus felt his heart throb wildly once again. She was a princess, the daughter of a king from the shores of Asia. How should he approach her? She was leading her flock out to pasture. Zeus took on the form of a bull. A dazzling bull with a snowy white coat and sinewy neck muscles, outfitted with horns that were more diaphanous than a diamond of pure water. It was such a gorgeous animal that the beautiful maiden drew closer in order to stroke it. The bull gently lay his warm muzzle on her breast and then knelt down at her feet. The princess thus grew bolder. In spite of the protests of her servants, she climbed onto the animal's back. It immediately jumped to its feet and rushed toward the shore. It galloped swiftly over the sea and took the unfortunate maiden all the way to Crete. Once there, Zeus changed back into human form and then satisfied his desire. The princess from Asia who would live here in Crete from now on was named Europa. To thank the animal that had enabled him to abduct the princess, Zeus placed the bull up among the stars. Keep your eyes on the sky. Not too far away from here is the Big Dipper. Its real name is Callisto. In Greek, Callisto means the most beautiful. It is therefore hardly surprising that Zeus fell head over heels for this nymph. There was just one thing. She was one of the servants of the goddess Artemis. Artemis was the goddess of hunting. She was also the goddess of virginity. Callisto had thus taken a vow of chastity. No man was allowed to get near her or her companions, who were all virgin huntresses. The last man who transgressed the rule was a hunter named Actaeon, and he was punished in a most dreadful way. Artemis changed him into a stag who was devoured by his own hounds. Zeus was well aware of the danger. He wondered how he could get around it. Who would Callisto trust without any suspicion whatsoever? The goddess she served, of course, Artemis herself. So he approached his heart's desire disguised as the divine huntress. And there he was, or rather, she. What Callisto saw was her mistress, who was making eyes at her and covering her with voluptuous caresses. Callisto's body trembled and then gave itself up. Several months went by. Callisto noticed with astonishment that her belly was growing. What was happening? Was it possible to get pregnant by a woman? It didn't take Callisto long to realize that she had been deceived by Zeus. If, by some misfortune, Artemis were to find out, that would be the end of her. A terrified Callisto desperately tried to conceal her pregnancy in any way she could. She kept herself hidden, wore larger and larger garments. But one day when she was bathing in the river, Artemis, the real Artemis, discovered the truth. Callisto had gone astray. It didn't matter whether she'd been tricked into giving in by a god or a mortal. She had to be punished. Sensing the goddess's wrath, Zeus, who was worried about Callisto's unborn child, immediately turned his lover into a bear and hid her away in the mountains. But he underestimated Artemis's abilities. Was she not, after all, the goddess of the hunt? Weren't her attributes a bow and arrow and her quiver? It only took Artemis a few hours to find Callisto, and without any hesitation, she shot the she-bear through the heart with an arrow. Callisto was dying. And so Hermes, the faithful messenger of the gods, was sent by Zeus to rescue in extremis the child that Callisto was carrying. The boy would be named Arcas. He would become king of Arcadia. And what about poor Callisto? Zeus didn't forget her. He put her body up in the sky to become Ursa Major, the Great Bear, commonly known as the Big Dipper. Zeus's amorous conquests were countless. From the goddesses, Zeus sought to acquire the virtues that he lacked. But he also spent his time seeking beauty for his own pleasure, beauty in its purest and simplest form, wherever he could find it, whether among goddesses or among mortals. Zeus may have been the master of Olympus, but in matters of love, he was not any better than the rest of us mortals in overcoming his desires. He was a very human, all too human, king of the gods.